Egypt. Midnight. A man brushes blood on his doorpost with a bunch of hyssop. The angel passes over. 2,000 years later, outside Jerusalem, a Roman soldier dips a sponge in sour wine and lifts it to the lips of a dying man on a cross. He uses the same plant. 3 doorways. 1 plant. The book never told you which. Mount Gerizim. Today, the Samaritan community gathers once a year for a Passover sacrifice that has not changed in 2,500 years. They come down the slope with bunches of dry stalks tied at the base. When a folklore botanist asked them what the plant was, they answered with one word: za'atar. The same plant. The Hebrew word for it is ezov. The Greek translation, hyssop. From there, into Latin, into the King James, into your study Bible, hyssop. But the European plant we call hyssop today, Hyssopus officinalis, named by Linnaeus in 1753, does not grow in Israel. Whatever Hebrew ezov refers to, it isn't the plant on the seed packet. The medieval scholars knew. In the 10th century, in Baghdad, Saadiah Gaon translated the Pentateuch into Judeo-Arabic. When he reached Exodus chapter 12, where the Israelites are told to take a bunch of ezov, he rendered the word as za'atar. 2 centuries later, in Andalusia, Abraham ibn Ezra rejected the identification. Saadiah is wrong, he wrote. Scripture says hyssop grows out of a wall, and oregano does not grow on walls. 20th century botany settled the dispute. Origanum syriacum thrives in the cracks of Levantine limestone. Saadiah was right. Ibn Ezra was looking at Spanish walls, not Galilean ones. 3 doorways follow. 1 plant, each one tells the same story. The book of Exodus describes a plague meant to break the will of a pharaoh. The angel of death will pass through the land at midnight, and every firstborn child will die, unless the household has marked its doorpost with the blood of a slaughtered lamb. The instruction is precise. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the basin, strike the lintel and the 2 side posts. The plant is a tool, a specified tool, used a specific way. Why a bunch? Pull a stalk of Origanum syriacum off a Levantine hillside today, and the answer is in your hand before you have finished thinking the question. The leaves are not smooth. They are covered in a fine gray down, thousands of microscopic hair like outgrowths called glandular trichomes. Each trichome holds a droplet of essential oil. Bundle 3 stalks together, and the matted trichomes generate something a botanist would later name capillary action. The bundle absorbs and holds viscous fluid, blood, ash water, sour wine. It does not drip. 1,000 years after the night in Egypt, the rabbis would specify the morphology in writing. The hyssop must have 3 stalks bearing 3 buds each. They were not making a symbolic claim about the number 3. They were specifying a volume threshold for capillary action, a minimum bundle size below which the brush stops working as a brush. The morphology is the mechanism. The plant of the threshold is engineered for the threshold. But there is more in those trichomes than oil that holds blood. The molecule the plant carries is called carvacrol. It is hydrophobic. When it touches a bacterial cell membrane, it does not stay outside. It slips in, the way ink slips into blotting paper. It intercalates between the fatty acid chains of the bilayer. Once inside the membrane, carvacrol does 2 things at once. The membrane comes apart at the seams. The molecule disorders the lipids around it. Permeability collapses. ATP and potassium ions begin to leak out of the cell, and at the same time, carvacrol's own hydroxyl group dissipates the proton gradient, the electrochemical battery the cell uses to make new AP. The cell loses its containment. It loses its power source, both at once. The plant of the threshold is the plant that kills what tries to cross it. The Israelites at the doorposts in Egypt did not know about lipid belayers, but the rabbis who codified the rite 1,000 years later were already looking very hard at the plant. In the Mishnah, the foundational corpus of Jewish oral law codified around the year 200, the tractate Negaim contains a passage that reads like a list of disqualifications. The mitzvah of the hyssop is that it should be neither Greek hyssop, nor blue hyssop, nor Roman hyssop, nor wild hyssop, nor any kind of hyssop that has an accompanying name. The rabbis are excluding every variety they could think of. Greek hyssop, Roman hyssop, anything carrying an epithet. The native plant, and only the native plant, fulfills the rite. 200 years before the Mishnah takes final form, 1,500 years before Linnaeus would name the European species, the rabbis have already drawn the line. 1,000 years after the Mishnah, in Cairo, Maimonides writes a Judeo-Arabic commentary on the same texts. When he reaches the question of identification, he is brief. Ezov in Arabic is za'atar. One word, settled. Then 1753 happens. Carl Linnaeus, working in Sweden, classifies the European plant and gives it a Latin name, Hyssopus officinalis. The phonetic similarity is irresistible, hispos, hyssop, hyssopus. The European herb takes possession of the English Bible's word, a plant the rabbis had explicitly excluded 1,500 years earlier. The translation problem is post-medieval. The plant on the doorpost in Egypt was not the plant on Linnaeus's table. The book of Leviticus describes a man returning from his exile. He has been cast outside the camp because of a skin disease the priests called sarat, a condition the Bible treats as a state of ritual death. To rejoin the community, he has to cross a threshold. There is a 7-day rite, cedar wood, a scarlet thread, 2 birds, 1 slaughtered, 1 set free, spring water, blood, and 1 plant. The hyssop is the only botanical agent in the rite. The cedar is wood, the thread is wool, the birds are the sacrifice, the water is the medium. The hyssop is the brush. The same Mishnah that excludes Greek and Roman varieties specifies what the brush must look like. The hyssop must have 3 stalks bearing 3 buds. This is the volume threshold for capillary action. Maimonides translates the requirement into a Levantine kitchen test in his 12th century legal code. The hyssop mentioned in the Torah is the type of hyssop eaten by homeowners and used as a condiment in certain dishes. The plant on every Levantine table. Ritual purity built on a plant the average household could pull from a wall. The Book of Numbers takes the same plant in the opposite direction. A red heifer is slaughtered, its body burned, its ash mixed with spring water. The water is sprinkled with a hyssop branch onto anyone who has touched a corpse. The plant is the agent that purifies the boundary between the living and the dead. The author of the book of Hebrews returns to the image at the founding of the covenant. Moses took the blood of calves with water, scarlet wool, and hyssop, and sprinkled the scroll and the people. The plant is what makes a covenant bind. The reader is assumed to know. Then the psalmist inverts the whole rite. Psalm 51 is David's penitential cry, written after the prophet Nathan has confronted him about Bathsheba. He is asking to be cleaned. The verb is the verb of the leper's rite, and the agent is the same. But the speaker is not standing outside the camp. The speaker is a king inside the palace. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. The threshold has moved inside the petitioner. The plant is no longer carried by the priest. It is requested by the heart. The rite is written. The plant is specified. And in 2025, in a Turkish laboratory, the rite is measured. A study published in the journal Plants tested a carvacrol dominant Origanum preparation against 2 animal wound models, linear incisions in rats, circular excisions in mice. The wounds treated with the formulation contracted faster. They closed with greater tensile strength. Hydroxyproline levels rose. Hydroxyproline is the chemical marker for collagen synthesis. Tissue VEGF and TGF-beta-1, the molecular signals for blood vessel formation and tissue remodeling, climbed. The enzymes that degrade healing wounds were inhibited: hyaluronidase, collagenase, elastase. The animal studies confirm what the rite already knew. The same essential oil tested in vitro produces inhibition zones against Staphylococcus aureus of 26 to 36 millimeters at 4 microliters per disc, exceeding the standard antibiotic ampicillin at the same dose. Against E. coli, 25 to 30 millimeters, again exceeding ampicillin. Against Candida albicans, more than 60. The leper standing at the threshold of his community in 1200 BC was about to be brushed with a plant whose oil today exceeds penicillin-class antibiotics in the dish. He would not have known this. The molecule did its work without his knowledge of it. The brush touched his skin. The oils released into the water. The bacterial loads on his wounds were reduced. He crossed back into the camp. The rite did its job because the plant did its job. But there is one more threshold. The Gospel of John describes the moment before Jesus dies. He is on the cross. He says, "I thirst." A jar of sour wine, the cheap watered-down vinegar Roman soldiers carried, is standing at the foot of the cross. Someone soaks a sponge in it. They put the sponge on a stalk of hyssop and lifted it to his mouth. For 400 years, that line was treated as a problem. The Greek physicians had described their hippos, the plant they called hyssop, almost certainly the European species, as low and weak-stemmed, a foot tall, soft. There was no way a stalk of this plant could have lifted a wet sponge to the mouth of a man crucified on a Roman cross. So the verse looked corrupt. Something must have been changed. Something must have been wrong. In 1572, the German humanist Joachim Camerarius proposed an emendation. He had been reading the Greek classical authors. He had no manuscript evidence, only the same physical objection. He suggested that hyssop, had been a scribal error for hiss, javelin. Take the P off the end, and the verse becomes a soldier raising a sponge on a spear. Cleaner, more plausible. The conjecture was published posthumously. A century later, the manuscript appeared. Minuscule 476 is an 11th century Greek New Testament, hand-copied in cursive by a Byzantine scribe, and now held in the British Library. Where every other ancient manuscript reads Hyssop, this single 11th century cursive reads Hiss. Camerarius's conjecture was vindicated by a 1,000-year-old textual witness. The javelin reading went mainstream. James Moffat put it in his 1913 New Testament. Edgar Goodspeed's 1923 American translation called it a pike. The 1970 New English Bible printed on a javelin. Then Raymond Brown closed the case. Brown was a Catholic biblical scholar. His 2-volume Death of the Messiah, published in 1994, is still the reference work for the Passion narratives. On pages 1075 and 1076, he addresses the javelin theory. He has 3 lines of evidence. The first is military. Pissos, the Greek word, translates the Latin pilum, a heavy legionary spear. The Roman soldiers at the crucifixion were not legionaries. They were auxiliary cohort, the local provincial garrison. Wrong weapon, wrong unit. The second is internal. 3 verses later, in John chapter 19, verse 34, a soldier pierces Jesus' side with a spear. John uses the word logche. He knew the right Greek for a spear. He used it. If verse 29 had also meant a spear, he would have used loke both times. The third is botanical. The European hyssop is short. Origanum syriacum, the plant the rabbis specified and the Samaritans still gather, has stems that reach a yard in length. And the standard Roman cross used on non-citizens in the provinces was the crux humilis, the low cross, where the victim's feet were nailed inches above the ground. A 40-centimeter stem can reach the mouth of a man on a low cross. Origanum syriacum stems are 90 centimeters. The botany solved the textual criticism. The variant in minuscule 476 is treated by modern scholarship as a haplography, a copyist who accidentally dropped a syllable. The plant the rabbis specified had the morphology to do the job. John, writing decades after the event, knew this. But there is one more wrinkle. Matthew and Mark describe the same scene, same sponge, same sour wine, same crucified man. They do not say hyssop. They use the Greek word kalamos, reed or staff. The harmonizing instinct says, tie a hyssop bundle to a reed. Brown rejects the move. The spontaneity of the action, he writes, does not allow for a prepared instrument. Matthew and Mark used the generic term for stalk. John used the species. Different evangelists, different lexical registers, both consistent with a low cross and a 90-centimeter stem. The plant carries all 4 accounts. Hyssop at the doorpost in Egypt. Hyssop at the cross outside Jerusalem. John is not writing accidentally. He is the only evangelist who specifies the plant by name. He is the same evangelist who has, 3 chapters earlier, called Jesus the Lamb of God. The blood marked on the new doorway is the same plant that marked the old, a bundle of dry stalks, oil-rich and aromatic, pressed against parched lips. The smell of za'atar, the molecule that has worked for 3,000 years working still. Hyssop in the modern sense, the plant on the seed packet, Hyssopus officinalis, named by a Swedish botanist in 1753, does not grow in Israel. Hyssop in the biblical sense still does. Mount Gerizim, today. A Samaritan elder gathers a bundle of dry stalks tied at the base, the way the priests have done for 2,500 years. The same plant, the same gesture, the same purpose. The plant still purifies. The molecule still works. The morphology still holds. The doorway still opens. If you want to spend more time at this table, among the sacred remedies and the actual plants of the actual book, subscribe. There will be more. A bunch of hyssop, dipped in lamb's blood, struck against the lintel. A bundle of hyssop, soaked in sour wine, lifted to the lips of a dying man. A bundle of hyssop, on a hillside in Samaria. A stone bull, a priest, a lamb, an evening, exactly the way it was done before there was an Israel. The book did not invent the plant. The plant was already there.